I will never forget the moment I saw my mother on the cold ground. And the words of the homeless guy holding her, "Don't be afraid, I'm just keeping her warm. She's lost." But let's start from the beginning. Richard Sterling had just closed a multi-million-dollar deal. His company was thriving, contracts were pouring in one after another, and business partners were lining up. At 42, he was at the top of his game. The CEO of a huge holding company, a man whose name was known in business circles. Money, power, success, he had it all. But he had no time for anything except work. That evening started as usual. Richard left the office late, around 9 in the evening. The city had already plunged into darkness, streetlights illuminating the snow-covered streets. Winter had been especially cold this year. He got into his car when his phone rang. It was the housekeeper, Mrs. Martha Higgins. "Mr. Sterling, I'm sorry to bother you so late," the woman's voice trembled. "Mrs. Sterling isn't home. I thought she was with you or one of her friends, but it's already 9 o'clock, and she's still not here. I don't know what to do." Richard felt everything tighten inside him. "What do you mean, not home? Since the morning?" "Yes, I arrived at 8 in the morning as usual, and she was already gone. I thought she went out for a walk or to run errands. But she isn't answering her phone, and it's so late." Richard abandoned his car and called a taxi. While riding to his mother's house, he called her over and over again. Her phone was unreachable. His heart was pounding like crazy. Eleanor never left for long without warning. She lived alone in a spacious apartment he had bought for her. She was independent and active. But in recent months, he had noticed strange things. She might repeat the same thing several times, forget where she put her keys, or ask about something they had just discussed. But before we continue, please write which city you are from. It is important for us to know where our stories are reaching. Arriving at his mother's place, he found an empty apartment. Martha was standing in the hallway with tear-stained eyes. "I called all her friends, no one has seen her. What should we do?" Richard called the police. The search began. He called acquaintances, family, friends, drove around the neighborhoods where she might be. Hospitals, clinics, stores, everywhere the answer was the same: "No, we haven't seen her." The night turned into a nightmare. Richard didn't sleep a wink, driving around the city, peering into the faces of passers-by, stopping every elderly woman on the street. The police were working, but there were no leads. His mother had seemed to vanish into thin air. By morning, he was on the edge. Fear, guilt, despair, everything mixed into one. He understood, if he had spent more time with her, if he hadn't been so busy with his deals, maybe he would have noticed that something was wrong with her. The day began gray and cold. Snow was falling in flakes, the wind piercing to the bone. Richard continued his search. Around 2 in the afternoon, he was driving past the old industrial district, where factories used to be, and now semi-abandoned buildings stood. And suddenly he froze. On the side of the road, leaning against the wall of an old house, sat a woman in a light coat. Next to her was a young guy in a torn jacket, hugging her, clearly trying to keep her warm. Richard jumped out of the car and ran. "Mom!" Eleanor raised a clouded gaze to him. She clearly didn't understand where she was. Her face was pale, her lips blue from the cold, her hands trembling. The guy next to her gently supported her, covering her with his jacket. "Are you her son?" the guy asked, looking at Richard. He was about 25 or 27 years old, his face weathered, his clothes clearly not fresh, but his eyes were lively and kind. "Yes, I'm her son." Richard knelt before his mother. "Mom, can you hear me?" Eleanor slowly nodded, but it was clear she was still confused. "She got lost," the guy explained. "I found her a few hours ago. She was wandering around this neighborhood, crying, saying she didn't remember the way home. It was very cold. I brought her here, tried to warm her up. I don't have a phone, otherwise I would have called for help. I just sat with her and waited for someone to come." Richard looked at this homeless guy and couldn't utter a word. Emotions were boiling in his chest: gratitude, shame, relief. "What is your name?" he finally asked. "Daniel. Daniel Frost." "Daniel, you saved her. Do you understand? You saved my mother." Richard pulled out his wallet from his pocket, took out some bills. "Take this. Please. It's the least I can do." But Daniel shook his head. "I don't need money. I just helped a person. Anyone would have done the same. Not anyone, Richard said quietly, looking at him. Believe me, not anyone. He called an ambulance. The paramedics arrived, and Eleanor was taken to the hospital. Richard turned around to thank Daniel again, but he was already gone. The guy had vanished just as unnoticed as he had appeared. At the hospital, doctors conducted a full examination. The diagnosis sounded like a verdict: early-stage Alzheimer's disease. The doctor, an elderly man with tired eyes, explained that this is a progressive disease, that his mother needs constant care, supervision, and treatment. She could have frozen to death, the doctor said. You are very lucky that someone took care of her. Richard sat next to the bed where his mother slept and couldn't shake one thought: a homeless guy who had nothing did what he, a successful, wealthy son, couldn't do. Daniel found her, warmed her, and stayed by her side. But he, Richard, hadn't even noticed that something was wrong with his mother. Guilt gnawed at him from the inside. But another feeling was even stronger: gratitude and a strange curiosity. Who was this Daniel? Why did he happen to be there at that exact moment? And why did he refuse the money? Richard decided firmly, he would find this guy. And he would learn his story. He also realized one thing: his life had just changed forever. Work, deals, millions, all of it suddenly lost its meaning. The most important thing was the person lying in this hospital room right now. His mother. Eleanor. But I promise you, by the end of this story, you will learn something that will make you believe in miracles and the power of human kindness. Stay with us. The following days passed in a frantic rhythm. Richard organized everything possible. He hired the best doctors, a caregiver who was on duty around the clock, and installed security cameras in his mother's apartment and an alarm system on the doors. He studied articles about Alzheimer's disease, called specialists, and looked for the best clinics. Eleanor returned home 3 days later. She was weak but tried to smile, saying that everything was fine. The caregiver, Mrs. Karen Gable, an experienced woman in her 50s, watched her every step. Richard visited every day, spent evenings with his mother, talked to her, and read her books. It seemed everything was under control. But 5 days later, it happened again. Richard was at a meeting when Mrs. Gable called. Her voice sounded guilty and frightened. Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling is gone. I stepped out to the store for groceries literally for a minute. She was sleeping, I thought. But when I came back, she wasn't there. Everything dropped inside Richard. He abandoned the meeting and rushed to search. This time he knew exactly where to go. Something told him, that old industrial district where he found her last time. And he wasn't mistaken. Eleanor was sitting on the same bench near the abandoned building. And Daniel was with her again. He was holding her hand and quietly telling her something. His mother was laughing. Richard stopped a few steps away, watching the scene. Daniel noticed him and nodded. She came on her own, the guy said. I saw her, she was wandering around here, looking for someone. I walked up, she recognized me and said, "Oh, it's you. Good." Eleanor looked up at her son and smiled. Richard, here he is, my friend. Daniel. Such a good boy. Richard felt a lump in his throat. His mother called Daniel a friend. A person she had known for only a few hours. But to her, he was more important than all the caregivers and doctors. Daniel, thank you for taking care of her again, Richard extended his hand. I am in your debt. They drove Eleanor home. In the car, she held her son's hand and said, Richard, Daniel has such kind eyes. He reminds me of. I don't know who, but I feel calm with him. Richard remained silent. A strange feeling grew inside him. Not jealousy, no. Rather, respect. And something else. This homeless guy possessed something he himself lacked. Warmth. Simplicity. Sincerity. The following week, the story repeated itself 2 more times. Eleanor would leave again. And each time she was found with Daniel. She went to him as if guided by an invisible thread. He didn't call, didn't look for her on purpose, he just happened to be nearby. And she felt safe with him. After the 4th time, Richard understood, this was no accident. His mother found something in Daniel that neither medicine nor expensive doctors could provide. She trusted him. She remembered him even when she forgot everything else. Doctors said that with Alzheimer's, people often become attached to certain people, places, or things. It is their anchor in reality. Daniel became such an anchor for Eleanor. Richard sat in his office and thought. The decision came unexpectedly and logically at the same time. He needed to find Daniel and talk to him for real. Find out who he is, where he's from, what happened to him. And, perhaps, offer him help. Not out of pity, but because this man deserved more than life on the street. The next day, on Saturday, Richard drove to that old industrial district. This time without his mother. Just by himself. He found Daniel near the same abandoned building. The guy was sitting on the steps, reading a battered book. Noticing Richard, he raised his head and smiled in surprise. "Is Mrs. Sterling missing?" "No. I came to talk to you." Daniel nodded and put the book aside. "Okay. About what?" Richard sat down next to him. The cold wind ruffled his expensive coat, snow crunched under his feet. Around them was silence, broken only by the rare sounds of cars in the distance. "Tell me about yourself. Who are you, Daniel? How did you end up here?" Daniel was silent for a moment, looking somewhere into the distance. Then he began to speak quietly. And Richard heard a story that turned his entire view of life upside down. Daniel spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully, as if dragging them up from the depths of his memory where he didn't want to look. "I was studying to be an architect," he began. "At one of the best architectural schools in the country. It was my dream since childhood. I wanted to design buildings, create spaces where people would feel good. My parents supported me. My father was an engineer, my mother a teacher. We were an ordinary family, not rich, but close-knit." He fell silent, looking at his hands. "I was in my junior year when everything came crashing down. My parents were driving to see me for my birthday. Winter roads, black ice. Their car skidded into the oncoming lane. They both died. Instantly." Richard listened in silence, feeling something tighten inside him. "After the funeral, I couldn't do anything," Daniel continued. "I just sat in my dorm room staring at the wall. I skipped classes, didn't turn in assignments. People told me, take a leave of absence, get yourself together. But I didn't listen. I just fell into a hole. Depression, probably. Although I didn't understand what it was back then." Daniel rubbed his face with his hands. "I needed help. A psychologist, therapy, support. But I didn't even have money for that. My parents left only mortgage debt. I tried to sell the apartment, but the process dragged on. Friends supported me at first, but then, you know how it is. Everyone has their own life, their own studies. I became a burden." He sighed. 6 months later, I was expelled for failing grades. The bank eventually foreclosed on the apartment. I was left with nothing. Literally. No home, no money, no ID. I lost my documents somewhere along the way, and I didn't have the strength to replace them. At first, I stayed with acquaintances, then in cheap hostels while I still had some cash. And then, the street. Richard couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I've been living like this for 2 years, Daniel pointed to the abandoned building behind him. "Here, in this district. In winter, in basements, on steam grates. Summer is easier. Sometimes I find odd jobs, but it's hard without ID. I eat at soup kitchens, sometimes people give me food in stores. I don't ask, they just give it, they see a person in trouble." He looked at Richard. "You'll ask, why didn't I go to a shelter, why didn't I ask the state for help? I tried. But the system doesn't work for people like me. You need ID, proof of residence, paperwork. And I have nothing. And also," he paused, searching for words, "I was ashamed. Ashamed that I had sunk so low. That I couldn't handle it. I just gave up." Richard looked at Daniel and saw before him not a homeless man, but a person with immense potential whom life had broken in a single moment. A talented student who dreamed of building houses, now living in an abandoned building. "But despite all this," Richard said slowly, "you remained a human being. You helped my mother. Twice. 3 times. 4. You didn't walk past." Daniel shrugged. "How could I walk past? She was scared, alone, freezing. Any decent person would have helped." "No," Richard said firmly. "Not anyone. Believe me. I know many people who would have walked past without even looking back. You are different." Daniel didn't answer. He just watched the snow falling from the gray sky. Richard made a decision in that same second. "Daniel, I want to offer you a job. At my company. Nothing complicated at first, a support role, simple but official. With a salary, help with your paperwork, and benefits. You'll be able to get back on your feet. Rent a place. Start over. Daniel was silent for a long time. Too long. Richard began to think the guy would refuse. But then Daniel looked at him and said quietly, "Why are you doing this? Out of pity?" No, Richard shook his head. Not out of pity. Out of gratitude. And because you deserve it. You helped my mother when I couldn't. You showed humanity when you had nothing yourself. That is worth a lot. Daniel closed his eyes, and Richard saw a tear roll down his cheek. "I don't want to be your charity project," he said quietly. "I don't want you to do this out of guilt or obligation. If I agree, it's only on one condition: I will work honestly. For real. No special treatment. Just like a regular employee." Richard extended his hand. "Deal? You will work like a regular employee. Maybe even harder, because I see potential in you." "Agreed." Daniel looked at the outstretched hand. Then slowly shook it. "Agreed." At that moment, Richard felt something strange. As if something right had clicked into place. He wasn't just hiring an employee. He was giving a man a second chance. A chance Daniel deserved. And he also understood, this was just the beginning. The beginning of a journey that would change them both. 3 days later, Daniel Frost started work at Sterling Group. He had new documents, a uniform, a badge, and a modest but real salary. And for the first time in 2 years, hope appeared in his eyes. Daniel's first day began with him standing in front of the mirror in the locker room for a good 10 minutes, staring at his reflection. Clean uniform, name tag, combed hair. He looked like a regular person. Like the student he used to be. Richard got him a job as an assistant in the warehouse department. The work was simple: receiving goods, sorting, inventory. Nothing complicated, but official, with a contract, with a salary. His colleagues accepted him normally, no one knew his history, and Richard had asked him not to tell. The first days were hard. Daniel was out of the habit of a schedule, of discipline, of people around him. It felt strange to be indoors all day, strange to follow a schedule, strange to interact with colleagues. He was afraid of making a mistake, afraid of letting Richard down, afraid they would consider him incapable. But he worked. He worked like no one else. He arrived earlier than everyone and left later than everyone. He never complained, never refused extra tasks. The warehouse foreman, a man named Frank Miller, told Richard a week later. "This new guy, Frost, he's gold. Works for 3 men. If all employees were like that, our productivity would double." Richard smiled. He knew Daniel wouldn't let him down. A month later, the first paycheck arrived. Small, modest by company standards, but for Daniel, a fortune. He went to a nearby park, sat on a bench, and cried. Cried from happiness, from relief, from the fact that for the first time in 2 years he had money earned by honest labor. Money he could spend on food, clothes, a room. He rented a tiny studio apartment in an old building on the outskirts of the city. Just about 130 square feet, a bed, a table, a chair, a tiny kitchenette in the corner. The window looked out onto a courtyard where an old tree grew. But for Daniel, it was a palace. He had his own corner. His own roof over his head. His own door that he could lock with a key. The first night, he just lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, unable to believe this was reality. Richard stopped by the warehouse a couple of times a week to check how things were going. One day he kept Daniel after his shift and suggested, "Let's go get some coffee?" They sat in a small coffee shop near the office. Richard ordered a cappuccino, Daniel an Americano. The conversation started awkwardly but gradually thawed. "How's the job?" Richard asked. "Great," Daniel smiled. "I don't even remember when I felt so alive." "Thank you. Nothing to thank me for. You're doing it all yourself." They talked about work, life, plans. Daniel admitted he was thinking about going back to school, but was saving money for now. "I don't want to take from you," he said firmly. "I want to earn it myself. It's important to me." Richard nodded. He understood. For Daniel, it was a matter of dignity. A few days later, Richard took the next step. He called Daniel in the evening and suggested, "Come over for dinner. Mom will be happy." Daniel arrived at the Sterling estate on Saturday evening. He was nervous, holding a bouquet of flowers for Eleanor, bought with the last of his money. The house was big, bright, with huge windows and a garden. Daniel felt out of place. But when Eleanor saw him, everything changed. "Danny," she broke into a smile and rushed to him, hugging him. "My boy! I'm so glad to see you." Daniel hugged her back, and Richard saw tears well up in the guy's eyes. Dinner went amazingly. Eleanor was lively, cheerful, talkative. She told stories from her youth, laughed at Daniel's jokes, asked him about work. She remembered everything, how they met, how he helped her, that he loved architecture. Richard sat at the table and watched the scene. His mother, who had often been apathetic and withdrawn in recent weeks, was now literally glowing. She laughed like she hadn't laughed in a long time. And it was all thanks to Daniel. After dinner, they sat in the living room drinking tea. Eleanor took Daniel's hand and said, "You know, Danny, you remind me of my father. He was also so kind, so attentive. I feel calm with you." Daniel nodded, not knowing what to answer. When he was leaving, Richard walked him to the car. "Come again," he said. "Please. She really is better with you." Daniel looked at him and said quietly, "I feel good with her too. She's like a mom. My mom." Richard hugged him. For the first time. Tightly, like a brother. This evening changed something in both men. Richard realized he needed to spend more time with his mother. That work, money, deals, all of it didn't matter if he was losing the most important person in his life. And Daniel felt that he had a family again. Not by blood, but real. From that day on, Daniel became a regular guest at the Sterling house. At first, he came on weekends, then 2 or 3 times a week. Richard specially adjusted his schedule so they could spend time with Eleanor together. Daniel helped around the house, fixed things, went for walks with Eleanor, read books to her, played chess. She adored his company. With him, she became the Eleanor she used to be, lively, cheerful, interested in everything around her. One day, Richard asked the doctor observing his mother, "Doctor, tell me honestly, is she really getting better?" The doctor, a woman in her 50s named Dr. Susan Blake, nodded. "Yes. I see clear positive dynamics. Her cognitive functions have stabilized, she has become more oriented, there are fewer episodes of confusion. This is amazing for early-stage Alzheimer's. Usually, we only see a slowing of progression, but here there is even improvement." Richard felt something warm up inside him. What could be the reason? A complex of factors. The doctor looked at him intently. Proper treatment, of course. But the main thing is her emotional state. "You have changed, Mr. Sterling. You have started spending more time with your mother. And this young man, Daniel, she is very attached to him. He gives her a sense of safety, joy, meaning. For the brain, this is a powerful stimulus. Love and care heal no worse than pills." Richard listened and understood, they were on the right track. Daniel was changing too. He was getting stronger not only physically, normal nutrition, regular sleep, and work did their job, but also mentally. The fire reappeared in his eyes. He started talking more about the future, about plans, about dreams. One evening, as the 3 of them sat in the garden, Daniel said, "I want to go back to school. Finish college. Become an architect, as I dreamed." Eleanor took his hand. "You must, Danny. You have talent, I feel it." Richard nodded. "I can help with tuition, with." But Daniel shook his head. "No, Richard. Thank you, but I want to do it myself. I've already started saving. In a year or a year and a half, I'll save enough. Maybe I'll find an evening program or online courses. I'll manage." Richard didn't insist. He understood why this was important for Daniel. The guy wanted to prove, first of all to himself, that he was capable of rising on his own. Months went by. Eleanor continued to feel good. There were bad days, of course, when she got confused in time or forgot something. But such days were becoming fewer. Richard changed radically. He shortened his workday, delegated part of his duties to his deputies, and stopped taking every project that came along. He spent his evenings with his mother. Sometimes they watched old movies, sometimes they just sat and talked. Daniel became not just an acquaintance or an employee to him. He became a friend. A brother. A person with whom he could talk about everything. They discussed life, philosophy, meaning, loss. Daniel talked about his parents, about how he missed them. Richard shared his fears about his mother, about being afraid of losing her. You know what's strangest? Richard said one day when they were sitting in the kitchen having tea late at night, and Eleanor was already asleep. I thought success was money, power, the company. But it turned out that success is sitting like this and knowing that your mom is in the next room, that she is calm, that there is a person nearby whom you trust. That is real wealth. Daniel smiled. It took me 2 years on the street to understand, the main thing is not what you have, but who is next to you. You learned it faster. Richard looked at him. No. I learned it thanks to you. A real friendship grew between them. One that doesn't depend on status, money, or the past. Just two men who went through pain and found support in each other. Eleanor often looked at both of them and smiled. One day she said, "You are like two sons to me. One by blood, the other, sent by God. But both are equally dear to me." Daniel hugged her. "And you are like the mom I lost but found again." Richard felt something tighten in his chest. These two people saved each other. And they saved him too. Life finally found meaning. Not in millions, not in contracts, not in status. But in simple things, family dinners, walks in the garden, his mother's laughter, friendship with a man who was once homeless and now became part of the family. For the first time in many years, Richard was truly happy. But life, as always, was preparing new trials. And they were just around the corner. Misfortune struck on a perfectly ordinary workday. Daniel had been working at the company for 6 months and had established himself as one of the best employees. Frank Miller, the warehouse foreman, had even started entrusting him with more responsible tasks. On that day, Daniel needed to check the goods on the top tier of the rack. He climbed the metal ladder. An old one that needed to be replaced long ago, but it kept getting put off. Daniel was standing on the second-to-last step, checking the labeling of the boxes, when he heard a crack. The ladder snapped. It all happened in a fraction of a second. Daniel tried to grab onto the rack but didn't make it. He flew down from a height of about 12 to 15 feet and hit the concrete floor. The pain was unbearable. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Colleagues rushed to him, someone called an ambulance. Frank Miller stood nearby, pale as a ghost, repeating, "God, I told management the ladder needed changing. I told them." At the hospital, the diagnosis was harsh: a displaced fracture of the right leg, hairline fractures in 2 ribs, severe spinal contusion. Surgery, the installation of metal hardware, and long rehabilitation were needed. Richard rushed to the hospital 20 minutes after the call. He burst into the ER, found a doctor, and demanded, "The best specialists. The best room. Whatever is needed. Money is no object." The surgery was successful. Daniel woke up in the evening in a private room. The first thing he saw was Richard sitting next to his bed. "Hi," Daniel tried to smile, but the pain wouldn't let him. "Sorry I scared you." "Hush," Richard leaned toward him. "Don't talk nonsense. The main thing is that you're alive." The doctor said recovery would take at least 3 months. Daniel wouldn't be able to walk without crutches, he would need help with daily tasks, physical therapy, and constant observation. "I'll find a caregiver," Daniel mumbled. "Or ask a neighbor to check in. I'll manage somehow." Richard looked at him and said firmly, "You are going to live with us. At the estate. And no objections." Daniel tried to object. "Richard, I can't. It's too much. You've already done so much for me." "Daniel, listen to me," Richard took his hand. "You've become part of our family. My mother adores you. You helped us, now it's our turn to help you. We have a big house, there's a room on the first floor, so you won't have to climb stairs. Mom will be glad. And I'll be glad. Please. Don't refuse." Daniel closed his eyes. He understood that he physically wouldn't be able to manage alone. A small room on the 5th floor without an elevator, crutches, pain. It would be a nightmare. "Okay," he said quietly. "Thank you." A week later, when the doctors authorized his discharge, Richard picked Daniel up straight from the hospital and brought him to the estate. Eleanor met them at the threshold, threw up her hands, and rushed to Daniel. "My boy! What happened to you?" She helped him settle into the room on the 1st floor. Bright, spacious, with a large window facing the garden. Daniel lay down on the bed and felt his whole body relax. He was home. The following weeks became a strange but warm time. Eleanor cared for Daniel like a son, bringing food, helping with medication, sitting nearby and talking. On her good days, she was attentive, caring, and gentle. But there were bad days too. Days when she forgot where she was, confused time, didn't even recognize her son. And then Daniel, overcoming his pain, became a support for her himself. He calmed her down, talked to her, reminded her that everything was fine, that she was safe. Richard watched this and realized, they needed each other. Eleanor and Daniel were healing each other simply by being near. In the evenings, when Eleanor went to sleep, Richard would come to Daniel. They sat, talked, sometimes just stayed silent. Richard spoke about work, about how his view on life had changed. "You know, I've started thinking about changing the company's direction," he said one day. "Maybe doing something more significant. Not just chasing profit, but helping people. Social housing programs, support for the homeless, rehabilitation centers. Something like that." Daniel smiled. "That would be great. You inspired me," Richard admitted. "Your story, your strength. You showed me that money isn't the goal. It's a tool. The goal is to help." Daniel recovered slowly but surely. Physical therapy, exercises, patience. 2 months later, he could walk with one crutch. Another month later, without crutches, though with a limp. The Sterling house became his home. He woke up to the singing of birds in the garden, had breakfast with Eleanor and Richard, walked around the grounds. This was a family. A real family. But one afternoon, the past burst into their measured life. And it brought with it a truth that changed everything. Robert Malone appeared unexpectedly. Richard was working in his study at the country house when the housekeeper announced a guest. Malone, Richard's former partner on a project about 5 years ago, walked in with a broad smile and an outstretched hand. "Richard, old friend. Long time no see." Richard shook his hand coldly. He remembered Malone as a slippery character who was better avoided. Their collaboration hadn't ended in the most pleasant way. "Robert. What brings you here?" Malone sat in an armchair without waiting for an invitation. "Business, of course. I have a proposal that will bring us both a good profit. A project in commercial real estate. Shopping malls, luxury housing. You invest the capital, I handle the implementation. 50-50. Richard listened in silence. Before, he would have been interested. But now the offer left him indifferent. "No, thank you," he shook his head. "I'm interested in other directions right now. Social projects, affordable housing, helping the needy." Malone laughed. "Are you joking? Social projects? Richard, we are businessmen, not philanthropists. You can't make money on that." "Not everything is measured in money, Robert." Richard stood up, making it clear the conversation was over. "I'm sorry, but I'm busy." Malone stood up too, clearly displeased with the refusal. They walked out of the study into the hall, and right then, Daniel appeared in the doorway. He had just returned from a walk with Eleanor, who had already gone up to her room to rest. Malone stopped abruptly, staring at Daniel. His face changed, surprise, then something like triumph. "Frost," he pronounced slowly. "Daniel Frost? You?" Daniel froze. The color drained from his face. He recognized Malone. "Robert," he said quietly. Malone turned to Richard with a smirk. "Richard, do you know who this is? Do you know that he—" "I know who he is," Richard cut him off. "My friend and employee." "Friend?" Malone laughed out loud. "He was expelled from college for plagiarism. Stole someone else's project and passed it off as his own. He was kicked out in disgrace." Daniel stood silently, fists clenched. Richard saw the pain in his eyes. "Robert, leave," Richard said coldly. But Malone continued. "I was there, I saw everything. A scandal throughout the whole college. Frost tried to appropriate another student's work. The committee made a decision, expulsion. Fair, I believe." Richard stepped toward him. "I said, leave. Right now." Malone shrugged but headed for the exit. At the door, he turned back. "Think about my offer, Richard. And be more careful with your choice of friends." When the door closed, Richard turned to Daniel. He stood with his head down. "Danny." "It's true," Daniel said quietly. "I was indeed accused of plagiarism and expelled. I didn't tell you because I was ashamed. But it was a lie, Richard. I didn't steal the project. It was my project. Richard put a hand on his shoulder. Tell me everything. They went into the living room. Daniel sat down, covered his face with his hands, then began to speak. In my junior year, we had a big project, designing a mixed-use residential complex. I worked on it for months, put my soul into it. It was my best project. Malone was a year ahead, but he often came to our classes, talked to students. He saw my sketches, blueprints, the concept. I trusted him, thought he was just interested. Daniel paused. A week before the defense, I brought the project to the department. And 2 days later, I was called to the dean. They said my project was a copy of a work Malone had presented the previous year at a competition and received an award for. I didn't understand what they were talking about. I looked at his project, and those were my ideas, my solutions, my blueprints. He stole them from me and presented them as his own. Richard listened, and rage grew inside him. I tried to prove it was my work, Daniel continued. I showed drafts, sketches. But Malone had connections, money, influential parents. The committee took his side. I was accused of attempting to appropriate someone else's work and expelled. This happened a few weeks after my parents died. I was broken. I didn't fight any further. I just gave up. Richard stood up and paced the room. Anger overwhelmed him. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. That you'd think I really am a thief. Richard walked up to him and sat down nearby. I believe you. Unconditionally. And I will find out the truth. The following days Richard spent investigating. He hired a private investigator, contacted old college professors, found documents, witnesses. And the truth revealed itself in all its dirty fullness. Malone had indeed stolen Daniel's project. Moreover, he had bribed a committee member to take his side. Witnesses were found, classmates who saw Daniel working on the project, saw Malone begging him for materials under the pretext of looking for inspiration. Richard held the folder with evidence in his hands and felt rage clouding his eyes. This man had destroyed Daniel's life. Because of him, a talented student ended up on the street, lost everything. He called Malone. I know what you did, he said coldly. I know everything. And I will destroy you. You will regret every step you took. What? Malone tried to laugh, but the laugh came out nervous. What are you talking about? About Daniel Frost. About the project you stole. I have evidence. Documents, witnesses. I can destroy your reputation in a single day. And I will. Silence hung on the other end of the line. Richard hung up the phone and clenched his fists. He wanted revenge. He wanted Malone to pay for everything. But then Daniel quietly entered the room, and Richard immediately sensed his presence. He turned around, still gripping the phone in his hand. His face was hard, his jaw set. I heard the conversation, Daniel said. You're planning to destroy Malone. Richard nodded. Yes. I have everything I need. Documents, testimonies, proof of his fraud. I can ruin his career, his reputation, everything. He will pay for what he did to you. Daniel stepped closer, looked Richard in the eyes. Don't. Richard froze. What? Don't do it, Daniel repeated calmly. I don't need this. Danny, you don't understand, Richard almost shouted. This man stole your project? He destroyed your life. Because of him, you ended up on the street. He has to answer for it. Daniel shook his head and sat in an armchair. He spoke quietly, but every word was filled with strength. Richard, I understand what you're feeling. You want to protect me, to restore justice. And I'm grateful for that. But revenge is a trap. It won't bring back my lost years. It won't change the past. It will only take away my present. Richard sank into the armchair opposite him. But he must be punished? He already has been. Daniel looked out the window where tree branches swayed behind the glass. Did you see his face? He lives in a constant race for money, status, success. He will never be happy. Because happiness isn't in what you stole or took. It's in what you gave and created. Richard listened in silence. I lost 2 years on the street, Daniel continued. It was scary. Painful. Humiliating. But you know what I realized? That the most important thing in life isn't what you have, but who is beside you. I met you. I met Eleanor. I found the family I lost. I have a home, a job, a future. I live in the present. And I don't want to waste it on hating Malone. Richard felt something break inside him. All his anger, all his rage suddenly dissolved. You are an incredibly strong person, he said quietly. No, Daniel smiled. I just learned to let go. That doesn't mean I approve of what he did. Or that I forgot. I remember. But I won't let it control my life. Richard stood up and walked to the window. Outside the glass, the garden was visible, where Eleanor was walking accompanied by the caregiver. She was collecting fallen leaves and laughing. You know, all my life I thought strength was power, money, the ability to control a situation, he said. But it turns out, real strength is the ability to forgive and let go. Daniel walked up to him and stood nearby. You've already learned that, Richard. You forgave yourself for not being there for your mother. You changed your life. That is also strength. Richard hugged him. Tightly, like a brother. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for stopping me. In the evening, the three of them sat at dinner. Eleanor was in a wonderful mood, telling stories from her youth, laughing. She noticed that both men were thoughtful. What happened? She asked. You're both so serious. Richard looked at Daniel, who nodded. They told her everything, about Malone, about the stolen project, about the desire for revenge and the decision to let go. Eleanor listened carefully. When they finished, she took both of them by the hands. You have both become better, she said, and pride sounded in her voice. Richard, you learned to see what matters most. Danny, you showed what true dignity is. I am proud of you. You are my boys. Both of you. Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. And you, Mom, are our rock. Our beacon. She smiled. And do you know what's most amazing? I'm getting better. I feel it. My head is clearer, my memory stronger. The doctors are surprised, but I know why. Because I am happy. Because you are near. Richard squeezed her hand. And we aren't going anywhere. That night, lying in bed, Richard thought about what had happened. Daniel had taught him a lesson that no teacher, no book, no business training had taught him. A lesson in forgiveness. A lesson in letting go. A lesson in living in the present. He realized, revenge would bring no satisfaction. It would only poison his soul and take away time he could spend with his loved ones. Daniel was right. True victory is not about destroying your enemy, but about not letting your enemy destroy you. Richard stood up and walked to the window. The moon illuminated the garden, trees casting long shadows. Somewhere in the house slept the two most important people to him. His mother and the friend who had become a brother. He smiled. Life was beautiful. And there was no place for revenge in it. The next morning, Richard called the private investigator and said, "Stop the investigation. Close the case. I don't need it anymore." The investigator was silent with surprise. "But we have all the evidence." "I know." Richard looked out the window, where Daniel was helping Eleanor in the garden. "But some battles are better left unstarted. Thank you for your work." He hung up the phone and felt incredible relief. The weight pressing on his shoulders vanished. He was free. And Eleanor continued to recover. Every day she became more cheerful, her memory returned, her strength increased. Love and care were working a real miracle. Several months passed. Autumn turned into winter, winter into spring. Life at the Sterling estate flowed calmly and measuredly. Every morning began with breakfast for three, every evening ended with conversations in the living room or walks in the garden. Daniel fully recovered from his injury. His leg healed, although it sometimes ached when the weather changed. He returned to work, but now in a different position. Richard transferred him to the design department, where Daniel could use his architectural knowledge. But the most important changes were happening with Eleanor. During a routine visit to the clinic, Dr. Susan Blake conducted a full examination and studied the results for a long time. Then she looked at Richard and Daniel, who were sitting in her office, and smiled cautiously. "I see very good dynamics," she began. "Mrs. Sterling's condition has stabilized significantly." Richard tensed up. "What do you mean?" "Cognitive functions have improved," the doctor pointed to charts and scans. "Memory has become stronger, orientation in space and time is practically normal, episodes of confusion have become rare. The progression of the disease has slowed substantially. This is an amazing result for early-stage Alzheimer's." Daniel took Richard's hand. "So she's getting better?" Dr. Blake nodded, but her face remained serious. Yes, she has gotten significantly better. The disease is still there, and I cannot promise that it won't start progressing again. Alzheimer's is a chronic condition that cannot be fully cured. But right now, we are seeing a state of deep remission. She can live a full, active life. Possibly for years. Richard felt tears of relief running down his cheeks. How long can this last? No one knows, the doctor answered honestly. The disease develops differently in every patient. But what you are doing, love, care, emotional support, activity, is a powerful factor. You give her a reason to fight. Happiness and love strengthen the brain no worse than any medicine. Daniel covered his face with his hands. Richard hugged him. That means we need to cherish every day, Richard said quietly. Exactly, the doctor looked at them with warmth. Cherish every day. That is the most important thing you can do. When they returned home and told Eleanor the news, she simply nodded and said, I know the disease hasn't gone anywhere. But I feel better. And I am happy. Every day with you is a gift. She took both of them by the hands. We don't know how much time we have. But we can make every day count. In the evening, they sat in the garden, watching the sunset. Eleanor was reading a book, Daniel was sketching something in a notebook, Richard just watched them and understood, happiness is here and now. Meanwhile, Daniel made an important decision. He enrolled in an online program at an architectural institute. A different one, not the one where he was expelled, he didn't want to go back there. A new beginning required a new place. Studying came easily. The knowledge gained once before quickly returned. In the evenings, he sat at his desk, immersed in drawings and projects. Eleanor often came up, looked over his shoulder, and admired. You have such talent, Danny. You will build beautiful houses. I want to design housing for people who need it, he said. Affordable, but beautiful and comfortable. So that everyone can have their own home. Richard listened to these conversations and understood. This was exactly the direction he wanted to develop his company. He completely changed his priorities. Work no longer took 12 hours a day. He learned to delegate, trust his team, and refuse projects that carried no social benefit. Instead, he began developing a new direction, building affordable housing, programs to help the homeless, rehabilitation centers. Sterling Group began to change from within, turning from purely commercial to socially oriented. Investors initially thought he had lost his mind. But Richard was adamant. He found like-minded people, secured grants, and established partnerships with charitable foundations. Profits decreased. But job satisfaction increased. One evening, as the three of them sat on the terrace drinking tea, Eleanor said, You know, I sometimes wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't gotten sick? If I hadn't gotten lost that day? Richard and Daniel looked at her. We wouldn't have met, Daniel said quietly. Exactly, Eleanor nodded. I don't want to romanticize the disease. It's scary. And I know it might return. But it brought us together. It changed us all. Richard became more human. Danny found a family. And I gained a second son. She took both of them by the hands. I don't know how many good days I have. Maybe years, maybe decades. But I want to live each of them with you. That is the most important thing. Richard raised his cup, trying to hold back tears. To us. To the family we chose. To every day together. Daniel and Eleanor raised their cups. To family, they repeated in unison. To every day. That spring was especially warm and sunny. The garden bloomed, birds sang from morning till night, and the air was filled with the scent of flowers. Eleanor felt wonderful. She returned to her old hobbies, started attending a book club with friends, and even signed up for painting classes. There were days when she was more tired than usual. There were moments when her memory failed her. But these were rare episodes. Mostly, she was cheerful, active, and happy. Daniel studied with enthusiasm and had already started working on his senior thesis, a concept for a social housing complex for people in difficult life situations. Richard worked less, but more effectively. He realized, it's not the number of hours that matters, but the quality of decisions. And the main thing was the balance between work and life. They became a real family. Not by blood, but by choice. And this was the strongest bond imaginable. They learned to live in the present. To cherish every smile, every conversation, every sunset. Because the future is unpredictable, but today, here and now, they were together. And that was the most important thing. 2 years flew by like a single day. Daniel stood on the stage of the auditorium, holding a diploma with honors. He graduated as the best student in his class. His final project, the concept of a social housing complex for people in difficult situations, received the highest grade and was marked by a special award. Richard and Eleanor sat in the audience. They applauded the loudest. Eleanor cried with happiness, and Richard filmed everything on his phone to remember this moment forever. After the ceremony, a representative from one of the country's most prestigious architectural firms approached Daniel. "Daniel, we've been following your work. Your project is impressive. We would like to offer you a position in our firm. We are just developing a social design department and are looking for specialists like you." Daniel couldn't believe his ears. 2 years ago, he was living on the street. And now he was receiving a job offer of his dreams. I would love to," he exhaled. "Thank you." That evening they celebrated the event at home. The most important people in Daniel's life gathered at the table. Richard, Eleanor, and another special guest, Sarah. They had met 6 months ago completely by chance. Sarah worked as a social worker at one of the homeless shelters where Daniel volunteered. She was kind, sincere, with a huge heart. Their first conversation lasted 3 hours. They talked about life, about helping people, about how important it is not to lose faith in humanity. Daniel fell in love with her immediately. She, a little later. But she fell in love for real. Sarah accepted his past without questions or judgment. She said, "Your story makes you stronger. You know what it means to fall and to rise. People like you are rare." Today she sat next to him, holding his hand and smiling. Eleanor watched them and whispered to Richard, "They are a beautiful couple. I want to see their wedding." "You will," Richard hugged his mother. "You definitely will." Eleanor had felt good for these 2 years. Very good. The disease didn't progress, it seemed to have frozen, lurking. Doctors called it amazing stabilization, almost a miracle. Eleanor was active, clear-minded, full of life. But everyone understood, the disease hadn't gone anywhere. It was just waiting. Therefore, every day was priceless. Every breakfast together, every walk, every conversation, they cherished all of this as the greatest gift. Richard had also changed beyond recognition. Sterling Group had become a leader in the field of social construction. They built several residential complexes for low-income families, opened 3 rehabilitation centers for the homeless, and launched a vocational training program for people in difficult situations. Company profits decreased by about 30%. But the number of people they helped increased hundreds of times over. And Richard was happier than ever. Victoria appeared in his life. He met her at a charity event. She worked as a doctor at a rehabilitation center and was so passionate about her work that Richard couldn't help but fall in love. Their first date took place in a regular coffee shop. They talked about medicine, social projects, and how to make the world a better place. Victoria was smart, beautiful, and incredibly kind. She accepted him as he was, with all his changes, hesitations, and new priorities. "I like that you've changed," she said once. "You've become real." Today Victoria was also sitting at the table. She had already become part of the family. In a month, an event was to take place that they had been preparing for all year. The opening of a large social center called the Eleanor Sterling Center. It was a huge complex, a homeless shelter, a rehabilitation center, classrooms, a medical office, a cafeteria, a library. A place where people could receive shelter, food, help, education, and most importantly, hope for a new life. Daniel designed this building. Richard financed it. Victoria organized the medical part. Sarah became the coordinator of social programs. And Eleanor became the soul of this project. The opening day turned out sunny and warm. Journalists, government representatives, charitable foundations, and ordinary people arrived. The grounds of the center were decorated with flowers, music played, children drew on the asphalt. Richard opened the ceremony, but the main speech was to be given by Eleanor. She stepped up to the small podium and took the microphone. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was firm. 2 years ago, she began, I got lost. Literally. I wandered the streets, not understanding where I was, who I was, where to go. I was scared, lonely, freezing. And then one person helped me. A homeless guy who had nothing. But he had a heart. He warmed me, stayed by my side, didn't walk past. She looked at Daniel, standing in the front row. This person's name is Daniel Frost. And he saved not only me. He saved my son. Showed him what true humanity is. Danny became part of our family. My second son. Not by blood, but by choice. Daniel wiped away tears. Sarah hugged him. This center, Eleanor continued, we created together. So that other people who are lost like me, or hit rock bottom like Danny, could get help. So they know, you are not alone. There are those who will extend a hand. There is a place where you will be accepted. She paused, and her voice became quieter, more intimate. I live with a disease that can take away my memory, my clarity of mind, myself at any moment. But right now I am here. Right now I am with you. And I am grateful for every day. Because I realized, it's not important how much time we have, but how we live it. Who we share it with. She smiled through tears. I want to say thank you to my son Richard for coming back to me. Thank you to Daniel for showing us all what strength of spirit is. Thank you to everyone who helped create this center. And remember, one gesture of kindness can change someone's life forever. Cherish every day. Love those who are nearby. Because this is true happiness. Applause thundered for several minutes. People cried. Richard and Daniel went up to the podium and hugged Eleanor. The three of them stood there, a family created by fate. After the ceremony, in the evening, they returned to the estate. They sat in the garden at the large wooden table. The very same one where they had spent so many evenings in conversation. Eleanor, Richard, Daniel, Sarah, Victoria. Family. Not by blood, but by choice. By love. By mutual support and faith in each other. You know what I'm thinking, said Daniel, looking at the sunset sky. 2 years ago, I was sitting in an abandoned building thinking my life was over. That I wasn't needed by anyone. And now I'm sitting here, with people I love. I have a profession I'm proud of. I have a girlfriend I love. I have a family. And it all started with one simple gesture. I helped a person who was freezing. Richard nodded. And I thought happiness was money and success. But it turned out happiness is this. This table. These people. This garden. This moment. Here and now. Eleanor took both of them by the hands. You both taught me to cherish every moment. I don't know what will happen tomorrow. But today I am happy. I am with you. And that is enough. They sat in silence, watching the sun set over the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold. The wind rustled the leaves of the trees. Somewhere a bird sang. At that moment, each of them understood, life is unpredictable. It can be cruel. But it also gifts moments of incredible beauty and love. Daniel saved Eleanor. Eleanor saved Richard. Richard gave Daniel a second chance. And now together they were saving hundreds of other people. This is the meaning of life. Not in fighting fate, but in appreciating what you have. Not in accumulating, but in sharing. Not in waiting for a perfect tomorrow, but in living a full today. The story of Richard, Eleanor, and Daniel shows, it is never too late to change. Never too late to start over. Never too late to become better. And most importantly, family is not just blood. Family is those who choose to be nearby. Who support in difficult times. Who stay when things get hard. Eleanor's illness did not disappear. But the love around her created a space where the illness could not win. At least, for now. And this, for now, stretched into years of a happy life. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. Write in the comments which moment touched you the most. Maybe it was Richard's meeting with Daniel? Or Eleanor's speech at the opening of the center? Or the lesson of forgiveness? Tell us. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss new stories about people who change the world around them. Like this video if you believe in the power of kindness and that you need to cherish every day with those you love. And before you leave, watch the story we left here on the screen. We are sure it will also make you think about what is truly important in life. Remember, each of us can become someone's Daniel. Someone's Richard. Someone's Eleanor. You just need to not walk past. Extend a hand. Show kindness. And cherish every moment with those who are nearby. Because time is all we have. See you in the next stories.